A mafia boss in gray walks through snow to a cursed biker mansion bought for $100. Beneath it lies a locked door. What he opens brings the underworld back to life. Everyone scoffed when Don Polo, the once feared mafia kingpin of New York, bought the abandoned Hells Angels mansion for just $100. The neighbors whispered that the place was cursed, that the last man who lived there was never seen again, and that the basement was sealed by concrete, not by choice but by fear. But when Don Polo cracked open the bolted steel under the floorboards, what he found inside didn't just shake the underworld, it rewrote everything they thought they knew about who really won the biker war. Don Polo, 53, stood in the silence of a snow-covered New York estate lot, gripping a black fedora in one gloved hand. Behind him was nothing but tire tracks. In front of him, a mansion once known as the Pit, a fortress of steel, smoke, and screams, abandoned for over 3 decades after its Hells Angels owner, Billy Brassknuckle Voss, vanished during a shootout that lit the Hudson River sky. Polo had once ruled Lower Manhattan, but the empire cracked after his brother's murder, a betrayal wrapped in silence. Since then, he'd vanished from the streets, the name Don Polo becoming more myth than man. But when the city launched a forgotten winter auction, offloading criminal-seized properties for a symbolic $100, Polo saw one listing that made his breath catch. The Voss Mansion. Most thought he was making a last play for relevance. Some said he was losing his mind. But Polo knew what he was walking into, or thought he did. Because what he found beneath those rotting floorboards wasn't rusted chains or biker bones. It was a secret that had survived the fire. And a man who wasn't supposed to be breathing at all. The courtroom smelled like mildew and reheated coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as if they, too, were annoyed to be awake. Rows of plastic chairs held bargain hunters, city contractors, and a few curious nobodies hoping to snag foreclosed property on the cheap. Most were there for rundown duplexes or empty lots in Queens salvageable stuff. No one paid attention when a tall man in a charcoal wool coat stepped through the side door, moving like he owned the silence that followed him. Don Polo didn't look like a man who came for $100 homes. His suit was pressed, his gloves clean, his gray coat hanging sharp against his frame like it had been tailored with a knife. He held a black fedora in one hand, the brim lightly dusted with melting snow. No one said his name aloud, but a few of the older men in the back stiffened slightly. Some recognized the profile. Fewer dared believe it. The auctioneer barely glanced up from the podium as he called out. Next up, item Hashon 439. Located in Westchester County, former clubhouse. 3-story stone property. Seized by the federal government. Starting bid, $100. That was the moment Don Polo moved. He didn't raise a paddle, just nodded, one deliberate tilt of the head. Do I have any other bids? The auctioneer asked, smirking slightly, as if mocking the absurdity of it. Whispers rolled through the room. Wait. Is that him? The hell's he want with that place? No one's touched it since the fire. No one else raised a hand, not even a bluff. The room went silent. Sold, the auctioneer announced, gavel coming down like a sentence. To the gentleman in gray. Don Polo didn't smile. He didn't blink. He took the deed, signed his name in ink so black it seemed to darken the table, then walked out of that city building without ever looking back. They laughed when the news hit. A mafia boss buying the former Hells Angels mansion? The headlines almost wrote themselves. The tabloids called it desperation. The city officials called it poetic irony. And the streets? The streets said he was sending a message. No one had lived there since 1990. Not after the raid. Not after the shootout. Not after Billy Brassknuckle. Voss disappeared into flames, leaving behind only rumors, bullet holes, and a house that creaked even when no one walked through it. The place had become a local legend. Some said it was cursed. Others swore they heard engines in the night long after the smoke cleared. Now, Don Polo owned it. He arrived the next morning alone, driving a black 1965 Cadillac Fleetwood that purred like a threat through the snowy trees. Westchester had never known cold like this. The snow was knee-high and silent, muffling everything. The mansion loomed ahead like a forgotten temple, its stone facade streaked with time and soot. Icicles hung like daggers from the rooftop. Two cracked angel statues flanked the stairway, their wings broken, faces worn blank by decades of wind. Polo parked at the foot of the long driveway. He stepped out slowly, the Cadillac's door groaning open behind him, as if the car itself didn't want to let him go. Snow crunched beneath Italian leather shoes. He walked forward, hat in hand, until he stood directly in front of the steps alone against the weight of it all. The mansion looked at him, not with windows, but with eyes. Dark, frozen, waiting. A place with memory. A place that remembered blood and gasoline. The front door was triple-locked. But Polo didn't fumble with the keys. He didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small steel punch, jammed it into the rusted lock, and twisted with precision. The deadbolt snapped with a crack that echoed across the snow like a gunshot. The hinges groaned as he pushed the door open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The air that escaped smelled like old oil, mildew, and something deeper, something metallic and forgotten. He stepped in. The door shut behind him with a heavy, final thud. Inside, the mansion was preserved like a shrine left for no one. Dust clung to every surface, motorcycle parts rusted on workbenches. A pool table sagged in the center of the main room, still holding a scattered triangle of balls from a game no one finished. The walls were plastered with faded club insignias, patch jackets, Polaroids, leather vests pinned like animal trophies. A massive mural dominated the far wall. A skull engulfed in flame, wings spread wide, with the words, "Death first, honor second," scorched above. Polo moved through the space slowly, not like a man exploring, but like one returning to a battlefield. He didn't speak, didn't touch anything. He knew the story. Of course. Everyone did. The night Billy Voss vanished, 6 bodies were pulled from the wreckage. All unrecognizable. Some said the feds torched it themselves. Others said Voss rigged the place to burn. No body ever confirmed. No case ever closed. But Polo knew something else. He knew Voss and his brother had done business years ago, quietly, before things went sideways. Before the truck full of rifles disappeared. Before Polo's brother ended up face down in the East River. And everyone turned silent. He'd never said it aloud. Not once. But as he stood now, in the ruins of the Biker King's former throne, he felt the old pulse again. The one that said, someone owed blood. And someone had written the wrong ending to the story. In the back of the house, he found a door he hadn't seen on the floor plan. It wasn't part of the official records. The hinges were reinforced. The knob sat lower than usual, buried behind a bookshelf mounted into the wall. He pushed. It didn't budge. Not at first. But when he stepped back, took a breath, and kicked it hard just below the lock, something gave. Dust poured from the cracks. The shelf slid an inch. Then another. Then the wall behind it groaned, splitting open just enough to show steel beneath the wood. A vault door. Old. Cold. Fitted into the house like a tumor of iron. Don Polo stared at it. 3 heavy bolts. No keypad. Just a circular lock burned with grime and time. He set the fedora on a nearby table, rolled his sleeves, and crouched. From inside his coat, he withdrew a slender silver case. Flipped it open and pulled out a toolkit built for precision work. Picks. Light. Magnets. Within 15 minutes, the first bolt clicked free. 10 more for the second. The third resisted. But when it turned, when the bolt slid back with a mechanical sigh, the silence that followed was not just stillness, it was expectation. He turned the handle. The door opened inward. And the cold that poured out wasn't just physical. It was like the memory of something that had waited too long. A man sat inside. Alive. Thin. Pale. Draped in an old biker vest, stained with blood and mildew. His hair was long, matted. His beard had grown like moss over hollow cheeks. His wrists were scarred. Ankles bruised. But his eyes, when they lifted to Polo's, were sharp, sharp like glass. "You came late," the man said. Polo didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew that voice. It had spoken through wiretaps. Through fire. It had whispered from death. It belonged to the ghost he never thought he'd see again. Billy Voss wasn't dead. He'd just been waiting. And Don Polo, the gentleman in gray, had just reopened the gates of hell with a $100 key. Snow whispered across the windshield as Don Polo pulled the Cadillac around the final bend. Trees lined the narrow road like skeletal guards, their branches heavy with frost, forming a cathedral of silence. No streetlights. No tire tracks. Just the soft hush of wind and the slow rumble of a V8 that sounded more alive than anything for miles. The mansion emerged through the trees like a frozen relic white stone, 3 stories tall, its steep roof heavy with snow and icicles that hung like knives from every edge. The windows were dead black, the balcony rails twisted in rust and frost. A long, cracked staircase led to a pair of carved oak doors, each flanked by armless cherub statues whose heads had been broken clean off. Don slowed the car. But he didn't stop. He let it idle near the edge of the property, engine heat swirling into the cold. A neighbor across the street peeked from behind lace curtains. Another, a hunched man in a parka, stood still on his porch, pretending to shovel but never moving. Even the wind seemed to circle this place differently. They were watching. Everyone always watched the man in the gray coat. He stepped out, closed the door softly behind him, and adjusted the collar of his coat. He didn't wear gloves today. The cold didn't bother him as much as it used to. The snow crunched beneath his shoes, and the mansion loomed larger with each step. Not in size and weight. The kind of weight that pressed on the chest without touching it. The plaque on the iron gate still bore the scorched words, Voss. The last name of a legend, or a ghost, depending on who told the story. Some claimed Billy Voss burned alive in the basement. Others whispered he walked into the Hudson River that night and never came out. But no one denied what happened inside this house, not the blood, not the gunfire, not the firestorm that followed. Polo climbed the stairs slowly. Each step groaned underfoot, like the house remembered his name. At the top, he paused. The wind caught his coat and pulled it gently to the side, revealing the black leather holster beneath. He wasn't here for peace. He was here for answers. He pushed the door open with one hand. It hadn't been locked since yesterday. Not after what he found, not after who was inside. The air was colder than the snow outside. The kind of cold that clings to stone and secrets. Dust hung in the beams of light cutting through the shattered windows. The main hall was silent, but it felt like silence that had learned to listen. As if the walls had ears. He moved forward, past the burnt pool table, past the rusted jukebox frozen mid-song, past the shattered glass cases that once held trophies of war brass knuckles, chrome knives, photos of brothers who never came home. In the back, a trapdoor still gaped open like a mouth in the floorboards, its iron handles slick with condensation. He stared down into it. A long staircase, concrete and steep, descended into blackness. This was the same place he'd opened yesterday. The vault, the tomb, the prison. Where he'd found Voss sitting in silence, breathing air not meant to be breathed. Now the door below was sealed again. Polo didn't go down. Not yet. Instead, he moved to the window and pulled back the moth-eaten curtain. 2 more neighbors were outside now. One at the corner mailbox, pretending to sort letters in a storm. Another with a dog that didn't move, staring at the house like it was alive. He knew what they were doing, not watching him. Watching it. They'd heard something last night. Maybe they always did. One of them, an old woman with sharp eyes and gloves she didn't need, had whispered to him when he'd walked past earlier. They scream sometimes, she said. From the cellar. Not men. Not women either. Something else, like metal grinding on memory. He'd kept walking. But now, standing here, the silence began to crack at the edges. Because Polo remembered a scream. Not here. But 22 years ago. A different house, different fire. And his brother's voice, Frankie, cutting through the noise with a sound that still lived somewhere in his ribcage. Frankie was never supposed to be there that night. Don had told him to stay out of it. The deal with the bikers was sour. The guns had vanished. The money had gone dark. And someone had leaked intel to the cops. Frankie had driven out anyway. Thought he could fix it. Thought blood didn't mean betrayal. They found his car torched under the BQE 3 days later. No body, just his chain. Don still had it, buried in a drawer lined with velvet and ghosts. Everyone said it was the bikers. Everyone whispered Billy Voss's name. But Don knew better. The night before Frankie died, he'd made a call. And the man on the other end wasn't a biker. He wasn't FBI. He was something else. And that voice, low, calm, businesslike, had said 5 words that Don Polo never forgot. He's not part of this. But the fire didn't care. The truth had been buried in smoke and silence. Until now. Polo stepped back from the window and lit a cigarette, letting the smoke curl toward the ceiling like incense. His eyes scanned the photos on the wall, old, yellowed prints pinned like war memorials. Voss stood in the middle of most of them, big, shaggy, always smiling, always surrounded by leather and chrome. In one photo, Don saw a familiar face. Not Voss. Not his brother. A man in the corner. Blurred but visible. Clean cut. Wearing a suit. Same as the one Don wore now. But this man had a scar across his throat, a pale line that Polo had seen up close once, during a deal gone wrong in an alley behind Grand Central. He remembered the way that man spoke. Soft, measured. Like violence was just another currency. Polo hadn't seen him in 2 decades. But now, he had a name again. Attached to a photo pinned in a dead man's house. The house moaned slightly as wind pressed against its bones. Polo flicked ash into an old glass skull on the shelf and turned toward the stairwell again. This time, he descended. Each step down felt heavier than the last. The concrete stairs had no railing. The lights flickered not electrically, but like something was breathing in the dark. He reached the bottom, boots hitting the floor with a quiet finality. The air was thick. Cold. The vault stood open now. Billy Voss was gone. No chains. No blood. Just an empty chair and a cigarette still smoldering in an ashtray. He'd been here minutes ago. Polo's fingers curled slowly at his sides. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. But something was moving behind the curtain of silence. Something old. Something unfinished. He stepped toward the back wall, where a blackened filing cabinet stood under layers of dust. He opened the top drawer. Inside, he found only one thing. A photograph. His brother, Frankie Polo, standing beside Billy Voss, both smiling. And in the corner, behind them, the man with the scar. Don Polo closed the drawer and stared at the far wall. Not because of what was written there in red spray paint, but because he could now see it clearly. The phrase scrawled in a looping arc above the chair. Hell's Gate never closes. And Don Polo, the man in gray, knew exactly what came next. Because hell wasn't a place. It was a memory that didn't stay buried. And someone had just unlocked it. The hallway behind the vault was narrower than it should have been, built with the kind of brutal symmetry that came from paranoia, not design. Concrete walls, no windows, and a ceiling so low Don Polo had to lower his head slightly as he walked. Every footstep echoed like a warning he couldn't silence. There were no lights wired back here. Just the soft amber glow of a lighter flicked open every few yards, then tucked back into his pocket once the space was memorized. The air grew denser the farther he went. Not colder, he'd grown used to the cold, but heavier. Like something pressed down from above, something old and unspoken. The kind of pressure that made your bones tighten and your instincts question whether your next step was smart. At the end of the hall, the corridor curved suddenly left, like the architecture itself had been altered after the original blueprint was abandoned. And there, around the bend, in the bowels of the house no floor plan had accounted for, Polo saw it. A motorcycle. No, not just any motorcycle. A Harley-Davidson, blackened with age and rust, chained to the floor like it might try to escape. The chain links were thick, industrial, bolted into the concrete. Dust clung to every curve, every panel. But beneath it all, the chrome still shimmered faintly like muscle under scar tissue. Its front tire was angled perfectly toward a solid metal door embedded in the far wall, a bunker-style hatch with no handle, no hinges on the outside, and no signs of being opened in years. Polo stood still. The bike was a message. A monument. A marker pointing directly at that door. He crouched, brushed a gloved hand over the gas tank. The emblem was still visible beneath the grime, death first, honor second, etched beneath a grinning skull. The words of the Voss chapter. Their code. Their truth. He straightened and walked toward the door. It was built like a Cold War bomb shelter, solid steel, riveted at the seams, paint peeled down to raw metal. Scratches ran along the bottom, clustered toward the right side, as if something or someone had been clawing at it from inside. Polo removed his coat slowly, folded it over the seat of the bike, and set the fedora on top. His shoulder holster creaked softly as he reached into his pocket and drew out a magnetized lockpick. It wasn't the right tool. Not for this kind of door. But he wasn't here to pick locks. He was here to break them. He scanned the perimeter of the frame and found a small circular plate, tucked just beneath the left corner, old, rusted, but definitely a latch. Hidden, meant to blend. He pressed his palm to it. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. Then, he paused, pulled back his hand, and struck the metal hard with the base of his fist. A click. A grind. And the door shuddered. Not open but awake. The lock screamed as it disengaged, metal scraping metal in a sound that didn't belong in the present. Polo stepped back as the door creaked outward just an inch, then another, air hissing out like breath exhaled after decades of holding it in. Darkness waited inside. Not just the absence of light but something else. A stillness that had forgotten the sun. A kind of silence you only find in the deepest parts of a prison, where memory and madness became the same thing. Polo flicked his lighter open and stepped in. The room was small, barely wider than a storage unit. Concrete walls on all sides. A single cot nailed to the floor. A bucket. A metal tray that hadn't seen food in weeks, maybe longer. And in the far corner, crouched against the wall like a shadow fused to the stone, was a man. Alive. His eyes opened at the sound. Slow. Heavy. As if it cost him something to look. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just blinked. Polo stepped closer, lifting the lighter higher. The man's face was gaunt, skin pale beneath dirt and faded ink. Tattoos crawled down his neck, some blurred by time, others still sharp enough to read. Names. Dates. Symbols. One near his collarbone caught Polo's eye, R.I.P., Nina 89, wrapped around a black rose. He was barefoot. Ribs like prison bars. A scar curved from the corner of his jaw down to his collar like someone had tried to silence him permanently. But his eyes were alert. Not afraid. Not dead. Just watching. You Billy Voss? Polo asked, voice low. The man didn't respond, didn't blink. Just stared. Polo stepped forward until only 2 feet separated them. He crouched slightly, met the man's gaze full on, and repeated the question. Are you Billy Voss? The man's lips moved, barely. A whisper, raspy and unfinished. Not anymore. Polo's jaw tightened. I need answers. The man's head tilted slightly, like the words were slow to register. He looked down at Polo's hands, then at the lighter, then back to his face. Finally, he spoke again, this time more clearly. You, the brother? Polo stiffened. You knew Frankie. A long silence. Then a nod. Slow. Heavy. Polo's breath caught before he could stop it. You were there that night. The man's fingers twitched once against the stone floor, then clenched into a fist. He didn't nod again. Didn't have to. What happened? Polo asked, voice sharp now. Why was he killed? The man coughed once, a dry, brittle sound like dust scraping metal. Then, with effort, he leaned forward and whispered. Wasn't supposed to die. Polo stared. His hand hovered near his jacket, near the gun beneath his arm, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Then why did he? Voss, or the man who used to be, didn't answer. Instead, he reached under the cot and dragged out something wrapped in oilcloth. Slowly, weakly, he placed it on the floor between them and nodded once toward it. Polo leaned down and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a notebook. A thick one. Leather-bound, pages yellowed and brittle. He flipped it open. The handwriting was rough, blocky, dates, names, places, contacts. And on the third page, Frankie Polo payment intercepted. Mistake. Didn't know. Polo froze. Didn't know what? He said through clenched teeth. The man's voice barely broke the silence. He was insurance. They were watching us. Watching me. Thought he was leverage. Deal went sideways. They took him. Not me. Polo stood slowly. His pulse felt like it had moved into his throat. You let him die. The man didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just looked up, eyes hollow and exhausted, and said, "They said I was the threat. That he was a message." Polo's fists clenched. The air between them thickened. Then, slowly, the man leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. "I tried to stop it," he whispered. "They buried me down here for that." And Polo, for the first time since opening that steel door, realized the man in front of him wasn't just broken. He was buried alive. A sentence passed by someone neither of them had seen yet, someone who had orchestrated it all. The FBI? Another chapter? Or someone worse? The notebook in Polo's hands felt heavier now. Not just with names, but with unfinished business. He turned and walked to the doorway, pausing only once. "You stay here," he said quietly. "You move, you die." The man didn't respond. Didn't need to. He'd already been dead once. As the door creaked shut behind him, the cold air swallowed the hallway once more. And Don Polo walked back up into the mansion above, not with vengeance in his heart this time, but with a truth too dangerous to stay buried. The steel trap hadn't just held a man. It had held the missing piece. And now, the past was breathing again. The snow had stopped by the time Don Polo emerged from the corridor, but the silence in the mansion had deepened. He paused at the threshold between the basement and the main floor, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering in through cracked windowpanes. Somewhere above, an old vent clanked once a hollow, metallic cough and then nothing. Even the air seemed to wait. He didn't go to the front room, not yet. Instead, he moved toward the east side of the mansion, where the floor sloped just slightly, too subtly for most to notice, but Polo noticed everything. Years ago, a fixer had once told him, "Buildings are like men. When something leans, it's usually hiding pain underneath." He'd never forgotten that. He stepped into a narrow hall, lined with warped floorboards and faded biker banners. Some read, "Iron Saints." Others bore the flaming skull insignia of Voss's chapter crude, stitched by hand, but worn like armor. A cracked picture frame hung sideways from a bent nail. In it, 6 men posed shirtless, each holding a beer and a weapon. In the center, Billy Voss smiled wide. To his right, Polo's brother, Frankie. That smile, that moment, frozen in time, just days before everything burned. Polo turned away from the photo and dropped to one knee at the corner of the hallway. He rapped his knuckles against the floorboards in a measured rhythm, listening for the hollow note. Thud. Thud. Tap. There. The third board gave a softer echo. He reached into his coat, withdrew a folding knife, and slipped the blade beneath the edge. With a slow pry, he lifted the wood free, revealing darkness below. Dust curled into the air. A tight crawlspace, no deeper than an arm's length, ran beneath the hall. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained canvas, lay a rectangular bundle. He pulled it free. Heavy. The weight of secrets. He brushed the cloth aside. A book thick, leather-bound, the kind meant to last decades. The cover was embossed with a worn sigil, a skull flanked by twin revolvers. The spine had no title. Polo opened it. The pages were dense with ink, no printing. Only handwritten entries in blocky, all-cap script. No dates. Just names, numbers, coded notes. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. The financial skeleton of an empire. Cash, drops, guns, people. He flipped through slowly, absorbing names like a surgeon reading x-rays. Enforcers. Soldiers. Officers. Politicians. Even a priest. Page after page. Blood debts tallied with chilling simplicity. Then he stopped. Middle of the book. Left side of the page. His hand froze. There it was. Frankie Polo. Intercept. Confirmed. Collateral moved. Code. Goliath. The handwriting was different. Sharper. More precise. As if written with surgical intent. Polo stared. He read it again. Intercept. Confirmed. Collateral moved. His brother hadn't been caught in the crossfire. He was the crossfire. A name used. A move played. Not a mistake, a message. He scanned the entries around it. Above. Gavin Rayner. Agent. Contact maintained. Two-way leash. Compromised. Below. St. Vincent cleaned. Billy containment initiated. Polo's breath left him. He knew that name. Gavin Rayner. FBI. Used to run organized crime ops out of the New York office. Clean suit, smug eyes. He testified in court more than once, including in the trial that collapsed Polo's West Side operation in 2003. He always seemed too quiet for law enforcement. Now, he knew why. Rayner wasn't chasing the Mafia. He was steering it. Polo closed the book carefully, as if the ink might bleed if left open too long. He held it for a moment in silence, the leather warm in his hands like a living thing. Then he stood and moved toward the sitting room, where a broken fireplace yawned beneath a mantle of forgotten weapons. He set the ledger down on a table, next to a rusted knife and a glass ashtray filled with bones, too small to be fingers, but too real to be decoration. He flipped the book open again and scanned the later pages. Most were marked with single-word titles: dusted, settled, burned, closed. But one page near the back was blank. Nothing on it except a symbol. A circle, drawn in thick red ink. And inside it, the word, revive. No names. No details. Just that word. Don Polo leaned back in the chair and lit a cigarette. He took a long drag, then exhaled toward the cracked ceiling. He understood now. This wasn't just a ledger. It was a blueprint. A record of what had already happened, yes, but more than that. It was a guide for what was coming next. Someone had plans. To rebuild. To take back. To revive. And Frankie's name, his death, had been part of the foundation for that plan. Don closed the book gently and stared at the window, where snow flurried lightly against the glass. The mansion groaned above him, beams shifting like old bones cracking in the cold. Billy Voss had survived. He'd been buried to keep this ledger hidden. Because someone knew if it ever surfaced, if he ever surfaced, the whole machine would seize. And now, Polo held it all in his hands. The names. The codes. The proof. But proof was never enough. Not in this world. Not when ghosts held guns and justice came at the end of a barrel. Outside, in the distance, a motorcycle engine roared. Not close, but not far. Polo stood and moved to the window. There between the trees, a flicker of movement. A shadow disappearing down the road, too fast for detail, too slow to be coincidence. Word was getting out. The mansion wasn't empty anymore. Hell's Gate had opened. And someone was watching who came out. Don Polo reached for his coat, slid the ledger into an inner pocket, and adjusted his collar. His reflection in the glass caught him for just a second, the gray coat, the dark eyes, the faint scar beneath the left ear he'd forgotten he had. He didn't look like a boss anymore. He looked like a man digging up his own grave just to climb back out of it. He turned toward the stairs, leading to the upper floors. There was more to find, and time was thinning. He didn't know how many names from that book were still breathing, but he planned to find out. One by one. The first call came at 2:47 a.m. An unregistered number. No voicemail. Just the screen lighting up on Don Polo's nightstand like a ghost tapping glass. He didn't answer it. He never answered unknowns. But the silence that followed was different. The kind that made your skin itch. As if the call itself had been a signal not to speak, but to announce. It had been 3 days since he opened the vault. 3 days since Billy Voss had looked him in the eye and whispered truths that didn't belong in the present. 3 days since Polo had pulled the ledger from beneath the bones of the house and read his brother's name written beside betrayal, coded, reduced, marked for erasure like so many others. Now the quiet was cracking. He felt it in the city. It began on the fringes. A report of a tattooed man seen in Bayonne, riding a '94 Softail with no plates and a fuel tank painted flat black, Saints Forever scratched in jagged white letters along the frame. A warehouse fire in Red Hook. Unclaimed. No victims found, just the burned outline of a biker patch etched into the concrete by the heat. Then came the whispers in alley bars and backroom card games, old names surfacing in low tones, as if speaking them too loud might summon something. Thought they were gone. Someone saw Brassknuckle in Yonkers, alive. Nah, couldn't be. That fire cooked 'em all. Unless someone lied. Polo kept his face unreadable, but his hands moved differently now. Slower, calculated. Every moment in the mansion felt like standing on a pressure plate. He'd lived through turf wars, betrayals, federal takedowns, but this was different. This was personal. And personal had a way of turning quiet wars into loud funerals. On the fourth night, he drove out to a body shop in East Harlem. One that hadn't been open in 10 years. It had been run by a man named Cruz X Iron Saint, hands covered in ink, voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. Polo had helped him disappear after the Rico sweep of 2006. Now, the metal gate was open again. He parked 2 blocks down and approached on foot, boots crunching soft over grit and broken glass. No lights were on, but the interior pulsed with shadows, candlelight maybe, or just the flicker of a welding torch. The scent of grease and gasoline clung to the air, heavy and nostalgic. He knocked once on the side door, sharp and deliberate. The slot opened a second later. "Gray coat," a voice said, low and surprised. Polo didn't respond. A lock clicked. The door opened inward. The shop looked almost untouched, since its last day of life, dust thick on the tool racks, calendars frozen in 2015, a half-finished bike frame still suspended in the back like a ghost caught mid-ride. Cruz stood by the workbench, arms folded, face older than memory, but eyes still flinty with heat. "You brought the storm, didn't you?" he said. "I woke it up," Polo answered. Cruz nodded once, like that made sense. "You hear what they're saying?" "I'm listening. They say Billy's alive." "I saw him." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Cruz turned, poured a drink into a chipped cup, and slid it across the table. "Then you know what that means." Polo nodded. "The dead don't stay buried. Not when there's blood left unpaid." Cruz took a long drink. "They're stirring," he said. "The ones who still wear the patch under their jackets. The ones who never forgave. Voss's name is fire again. And your name is kindling." Polo leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I found the ledger." Cruz froze. "You sure?" "I read it. Every name, every move. My brother was a pawn. Used. Then discarded." Cruz ran a hand down his face. "That ledger was never supposed to survive. That's why they locked Voss in the pit. He kept it. That's why they sealed the house. And now it's open." Cruz nodded slowly. "There's gonna be war." "I don't want war," Polo said. "No," Cruz agreed. "But war wants you." By morning, the news had spread farther. Anonymous forums once dormant lit up with old symbols. Photos of riders in formation, posted with no captions. A video surfaced for 1 hour before being pulled, grainy footage of a group of bikes roaring across a frozen highway, one of them flying a flag last seen at Voss's funeral. The comment section had only one word before it was deleted: revive. By sundown, a black van was parked outside the mansion. No plates. No movement. Just parked, watching. Polo didn't flinch. He'd lived too long under the eye to be spooked by it. But when he went out to check it at midnight, it was gone. In its place, a single item had been left on the hood of his Cadillac. A matchbox. Hell's Angels logo. Vintage. Charred. Inside, folded tightly, was a note. "We remember, Frankie." He didn't sleep that night. Didn't need to. Ghosts didn't rest. They circled. They whispered. They wrote names in blood on the inside of your skull until you stood up and answered them. Billy Voss wasn't a memory anymore. He was a spark. And the ones who had scattered, those who had hidden behind families, behind covered jobs, behind new lives. They were dusting off their cuts and digging up their old grudges. They weren't after territory. They were after truth. The kind that bled. The kind that burned. By the end of the week, Polo had identified 3 former members of the Saints who had gone dark in 1992. All 3 had resurfaced, one in Albany, one in Jersey, and one found dead in an abandoned gas station near Poughkeepsie. Throat cut. Tongue removed. Message received. Someone was tying off loose ends. Or clearing the table for something bigger. Polo stood alone in the upper chamber of the mansion, the ledger in his hands, the wind rattling the cracked windows like bones in a jar. Below, the house creaked under its own history. He'd spent his life balancing blood and business, empire and loyalty. But this wasn't about territory anymore. This was about names. One name had started it all, Frankie Polo. One name had buried it, Billy Voss. And now, 100 names, forgotten and scattered like ashes, were riding again. The bikers weren't coming back. They were already here. The first unmarked car appeared 2 blocks away. A bland gray sedan with darkened windows and a layer of salt-crusted snow masking its plates. It didn't move for hours. Didn't need to. The eyes inside weren't here to act. Not yet. They were here to confirm what had already been suspected. Don Polo stood at the second-floor window of the mansion, hands behind his back, cigarette burning slow between his fingers. He didn't need binoculars. Didn't need proof. The angle of the front tires, the posture of the man behind the wheel, too stiff, too alert. It screamed bureau. They were finally showing their face. He'd expected it. You don't buy a known biker fortress, the same one that went dark after an ATF raid and was linked to a half-dozen disappearances, and not draw heat. Especially not when your name had once been circled in red ink on every federal board from Manhattan to D.C. What surprised him wasn't that they were watching. It was that they waited this long. Polo flicked ash into the tray, then moved toward the fireplace where the old ledger lay open. Pages marked, circled. Frankie's name. Rayner's code. The revival plan. He knew someone in the bureau had been feeding that fire from behind closed doors. The ledger said as much. Rayner. Compromised. Two-way leash. That bastard hadn't just watched it happen. He'd helped orchestrate it. Built a war and sold the ammo to both sides. And now the bureau was sniffing around again. Not because they feared what might happen, but because someone inside had realized the machine was breaking down and the truth was leaking through the cracks. By mid-morning, a second car showed up. Black SUV. Same model he'd seen at his arraignment years back. The driver stepped out briefly. Sunglasses. Earpiece. Badge flashed at no one. Just enough movement to say, "We're here now." Inside the mansion, Polo's steps echoed against the hardwood as he moved from room to room. He passed through the hall where the floor sloped and the secrets used to hide. The notebook in his hand felt heavier now. Every page read like a confession, not his, but someone else's. Someone who had never expected to be exposed. He descended to the basement, where the trapdoor still hung open. The vault was empty. Voss had vanished again. Not a word. Not a sound. Just the lingering knowledge that the war had a pulse now, and that both sides were arming in shadows. When Polo emerged, the front door of the mansion stood ajar. A man was waiting in the foyer. Black coat. Clean cut. Late 40 seconds, but carried himself like a boxer who hadn't taken a punch in years. No gun drawn. No badge shown. Just eyes that had already made the calculation. "Mr. Polo," he said. Polo closed the door behind him. "You're not local field." "No," the man agreed. "I'm the one they send when paperwork stops working." Polo said nothing. "Agent Wallace," the man offered. "Counter-terror division." "That what this is now?" Polo asked, voice dry. "Terrorism?" Wallace didn't smile. "You tell me." They stood in silence, the mansion groaning faintly around them. "You've been sitting on this place for years," Polo said. "Why move now?" "Because something changed," Wallace said. "We tracked chatter, encrypted messages, movement in closed circuits. Then the ledger surfaced." Polo's eyes narrowed. "So you know about it?" We knew it existed. Didn't know it still had teeth. Wallace stepped forward. Now names are surfacing. People who haven't spoken in decades are moving like the past is calling them. And we have bodies. Where? Red Hook. One of yours. Not mine anymore, Polo said coldly. Wallace nodded. Doesn't matter. Everyone thinks it's you. There it was. The real reason he was here. You think I'm reigniting the war? Wallace looked around. You bought the matchbox. I didn't light it. Doesn't matter. It's burning. Polo stepped closer. You ever lose someone to a lie, Agent Wallace? Someone who trusted you to protect them, and you watched them get traded like currency? Wallace's jaw twitched. You think you're the only one holding ghosts? I think I'm the only one not hiding from them. They stared each other down for a long beat. Then Polo reached into his coat and pulled the ledger free. He held it out. Wallace didn't take it. Why give it to me? Because you're not the one I'm after, Polo said. But you're standing in his way. Wallace finally reached for the book, eyes scanning the marked pages. When he hit Raynor's name, he froze. Polo watched him closely, saw the shift. The inhale. You didn't know, Polo said quietly. Wallace didn't answer. But he didn't need to. He turned away slightly, thumbing the edge of the page. I've been chasing leaks for 12 years, Wallace said. Didn't realize it was in my house. Raynor set my brother up, sold his name like a pawn. Buried it all in red tape. Wallace closed the book slowly. If I take this back, people die. They already are. Outside, the wind picked up. From the window, Polo saw a biker roll past slowly. Just one, unmarked cut. No gang signs. But the ride was unmistakable. Message received. Wallace looked up. They're moving. They never stopped. Wallace moved toward the door. If this ledger leaks, the whole system cracks. The Bureau's reputation will survive. Polo cut in. But only if the truth walks out the front door first. Wallace paused, one hand on the knob. Raynor's still active, he said. If what's in this is true, he's been building something behind our backs. He'll know the second I touch this file. Then don't touch it. Wallace turned, eyebrow raised. Take this instead, Polo said, holding out a single-page, a copied sheet, Frankie's entry circled in red. Wallace stared at it, then nodded. I'll run it quietly. You won't get a second shot. Polo warned. I won't need one. The door clicked behind him. Polo stood in the silence again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like the crosshairs had shifted. Like the bullet had finally found its line. Snow fell like ash. Heavy. Relentless. Silent. It coated the mansion's broken gutters and shattered shingles, buried rusted bikes half fused to the ground, and softened the cracked edges of Hell's Gate until it looked, from a distance, almost peaceful. Inside, Don Polo stood alone in the foyer, gunmetal light filtering through the high-stained glass window above. He'd locked every door, blocked every entrance that hadn't already been rotted through. Every board creaked beneath his steps like it remembered boots from 30 years ago. The mansion was holding its breath. Outside, engines purred low. Not just one, a dozen. Then more, faint at first, like thunder too far to care about. Then closer. And closer. The Iron Saints were coming home. Polo adjusted his coat, his hands calm, precise. The Colt .45 rested heavy on his hip, oiled, loaded, ready. The ledger was locked in the safe behind the fireplace, a decoy copy left out in plain view. Let them take it if they made it that far. Let them think they'd won something. He didn't plan on letting them make it past the front steps. A shadow moved past the frosted glass at the front door. Then another. Then 3 more. The air changed. Tightened. Polo felt it in his ribs, that old tickle of war pressing through the walls. He'd stood like this before in Havana, in Queens, in a back alley in Palermo with blood drying on his sleeve. He knew the rhythm. The silence before screams. Then a knock. Once. Twice. The kind of knock that didn't expect a door to open. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Another knock. Then a voice muffled but clear. You stole from the dead, Dawn. Polo didn't answer. You opened a house that was never yours. Still silent. Your breathing borrowed air. We came to collect. Then the door shuttered. Not from a hand. From a boot. The first kick cracked the hinges. The second one splintered the frame. Polo stepped back, centered his stance. Third kick, the door flew inward. A figure stepped through the snow, black leather cut worn to bone. Face masked, shotgun raised. Polo fired once. The man dropped. Screams followed chaos, boots pounding, bodies rushing forward. The siege had begun. The next 10 minutes moved like war-torn memory. The house filled with echoes, gunfire cracking through stairwells, shouting down hallways, the thud of flesh against drywall. Polo moved like he always had, smooth, merciless, mathematical. One shot for every threat, one breath for every corner. The bikers weren't organized. They were angry, vengeful. They thought numbers meant power. But this house knew Don Polo. And he knew how to bleed ghosts. At the top of the stairs, he took out 2 more. One dropped a flare as he fell. Fire erupted on the second-floor landing, bathing the upper rail in red. Polo ducked low, gun smoking, coat torn at the sleeve. The fourth man reached for a grenade. Polo didn't let him finish the motion. Blood hit the wall. Then, everything stopped. Not quiet stillness. Like the mansion itself had paused to see what came next. Polo listened. Footsteps. Heavy, slow. Not like the rest. This wasn't a soldier. This was a leader. He stepped out from the shadows beneath the grand staircase. Tall. Shoulders like an old tank. Hair gray. Beard thicker than memory. The cut on his back still bore the Iron Saint's insignia, barely faded, flames rising behind a skull. Billy Voss. Alive. And standing 5 feet from the man who'd watched his own brother die for this legacy. Polo didn't lift the gun. Not yet. Voss looked older. Not just in years and weight, in silence. The kind of man who hadn't spoken for so long, words might come out in dust. He didn't speak. He just looked at Polo. And then, behind Polo, a door creaked. He turned, half expecting another attacker. But it wasn't. It was a man in a long coat, dark scarf wound around his throat. Scar above his left brow, eyes like regret. Cruz. From the garage in Harlem, holding a shotgun low. Angled, loaded. He stepped beside Polo, without a word. Then another shadow moved in the hall. And another. 3 more. Old faces. Former enemies. Forgotten soldiers. Men who'd buried the cut but kept the code. They stood behind Polo. Not for him, but for the truth. Voss looked at them all. Then slowly, so slowly, he removed the cut from his back. Let it fall to the blood-soaked floor. You read it, he said. Polo nodded once. I wrote it, Voss said. No denial. No apology. Just fact. You wrote my brother's name into a death sentence. I wrote what they told me to write, Voss said. You want the truth? I was going to burn it. All of it. I got cold feet. Hid it instead. And went underground. They sealed me in. They? Voss looked at him, tired. You already know. Rainer. The Bureau. Everyone who had ever wanted to erase both biker and mafia bloodlines in one masterstroke. Voss had been a tool. Then a liability. Then a ghost. You killed him, Polo said. Whether you pulled the trigger or not. Voss didn't flinch. I buried him, he said. But I didn't kill him. The room felt like a gun about to go off. Then Cruz stepped forward. We're not here for vengeance, he said. Not anymore. Polo didn't speak. Cruz looked to him. We're here to end it. Voss stared at the men behind Polo. Then back to Polo. And for the first time, his voice cracked. Let me do something right before I die. No one moved. Then slowly, Polo lowered the gun. Outside, sirens began to echo in the distance. Wallace was coming. And when he arrived, he'd find survivors. But not a battlefield. Not this time. Polo turned, walked away from Voss, and down the steps to the vault where the ledger still waited. Let the Bureau clean the bones. Let the snow bury what was left. Let the war end here. He had no more bullets to spend on the past. Only truths to protect. The snow hadn't stopped. Days later, it was still falling, lighter now, like ash from a fire already burned. The mansion stood quietly beneath it all, windows dark, doors bolted, the iron gate rusted but closed. What had happened inside had left no scorch marks, no headlines. Only the faintest tremble in the underworld's web. A breath held. A silence measured. Don Polo stood in the grand room beneath the shattered chandelier, sunlight struggling through dusty glass, casting fractured light over the table in front of him. The ledger lay open, its pages warped now, corners curled, ink bled faintly from time and tension. But the names were still legible, the codes still intact. The map of a war no one had won. Across from him sat Agent Wallace. He hadn't come with backup this time. No van. No suits. Just a man with tired eyes and a folder full of names he could no longer ignore. "You could have burned it," Wallace said. Polo didn't look up. "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" Polo closed the ledger gently. "Because I didn't come here to reclaim anything. I came to finish something." He walked to the fireplace, pulled the grate aside, and revealed the safe embedded in the wall behind. He spun the dial, opened the steel door, and withdrew a second book, thin, leather-bound like the first, but clean, blank, fresh. Wallace watched him with guarded curiosity. Polo laid it beside the original ledger. "I'm not adding more names to that one," he said. "That book ends with my brother." Wallace glanced toward the scorched doorframe across the hall. "What happens now?" Polo opened the blank book and uncapped a pen. "Now?" he said. "We rewrite it." He began listing names. Not the dead ones. Not the fallen. The living. The ones who'd survived in silence. Cruz. Elena Moretti. Deacon Rain. The 6 bikers who stood beside him. The 2 FBI agents who had leaked warnings before they were cut loose. He wrote each one like a vow. "This is the truth," Polo said. "They all survived because someone kept them buried. We don't dig up the bones for revenge. We do it to stop it from happening again." Wallace sat back. "You think this ledger makes that possible?" "No," Polo said. "I think what we do with it does." He picked up the original book and handed it to Wallace. "I want immunity for every name I just wrote in this new one. No charges. No follow-up. You get the files, the recordings, the proof. I get silence." Wallace hesitated. "You're asking for a ceasefire. I'm offering one. You think they'll go for that?" "They'll follow me," Polo said. "If I say the war is over, it's over. But if this book leaks, if one name gets dragged out of context, hung out to dry, then everything we've done falls apart." Wallace held the book like it might ignite in his hands. He looked at Polo long and hard. "You trust me?" "No," Polo said. "I trust that you're tired of cleaning up blood that doesn't belong to you." Outside, the wind picked up again. Polo moved to the window and stared out over the snow-covered grounds. Tire tracks still scarred the white, faint, fading. But they were there. Proof that something had happened, even if no one else saw it. He remembered his brother's last phone call. Just a static breath and 2 words, "It's him." He hadn't known who him was. Not then. Now he did. Raynor. The architect, the one who'd drawn the lines between families and gangs and feds and made sure no one saw the whole picture. He was gone now. Wallace had confirmed it, found in a motel outside Albany, wrist slit, note typed but unsigned. One line, "I built the fire, but the smoke betrayed me." Polo didn't smile. There was no victory in it. Only ending. He turned back toward the hearth, toward Wallace, toward the room that had once held secrets too sharp to speak. "This house was never a prize," he said. "It was a grave." Wallace nodded. "And you bought it to find the body?" "No," Polo said. "I bought it to bury the lie. The mansion wouldn't be sold again. No press release. No auction. It would be boarded up. Legally protected as a historical site tied to ongoing federal proceedings, which meant it would stay locked. Exactly how Polo wanted it. He walked through the hall one last time, finger trailing the dust along the stair rail, past the bloodstains scrubbed clean, past the photo of Frankie and Voss, both younger than time should allow. He stopped beneath it, whispered something only the walls would hear, then turned and left. No suit, no fedora. Just a man in gray, walking back into the snow, lighter than when he came. And behind him, a house that no longer needed to scream. By spring, the snow had melted, but Hell's Gate didn't thaw right away. The mansion stood like a relic of a war too old for newspapers and too quiet for headlines. Tourists didn't come here. Real estate vultures circled, then disappeared. No one dared claim it. No one except those who knew what it had once meant and what it now meant even more. Don Polo didn't live there anymore. He hadn't stayed after the last meeting with Wallace. There was no parade. No closing statement. He'd packed up what little he'd brought: a gun, a name, a promise, and walked out the front gate without turning back. But the house remained. Something changed. Not in structure, the bones were still bad. The walls still whispered when the wind hit right, but in presence. The iron gate didn't groan like it used to. The upstairs window, once shattered, had been replaced. Not with stained glass that was too showy, but with plain, clear panes that let the light in. The front steps were swept each week. A local kid, name was Emilio, started doing it on his own. Said his uncle used to ride. Said he heard stories and wanted to help clean the place up. No one stopped him. In time, others came. Not in suits, not in colors, not to settle scores. They came to talk, to sit, to remember. Some lit candles. Some brought photos. One man showed up with a rusted gas tank and a bullet lodged in it, placed it on the steps like a peace offering, nodded once at the door, and left. The house became something it had never been before. A neutral ground. No deals were made here. No blood spilled. Inside, the furniture was sparse. A few chairs. A long table made from salvaged floorboards. One room on the main floor had been converted, walls covered in maps, documents, timelines. The ledger was locked in a steel case inside that room. Sealed by order of the Bureau, but the walls around it told the story. People started calling it the archive. Not publicly. Not online. Just in whispers. If you needed to know what happened, really happened, you came here, not for revenge, not for gossip. For understanding. Cruz ran the place now. Quietly, with help from Elena and two others from the old days. They didn't speak often, didn't need to. They kept the house breathing. Not alive, just breathing. Enough to let the silence settle right. There was no flag outside. No sign. The only mark left was carved into the stone at the gate. A single word, chiseled low and discreet. Remember. Don Polo didn't come back for nearly 3 months. When he did, he didn't go inside. He stood across the street, a coat slung over his shoulder. Hair longer now, beard unkempt but clean. Cruz saw him from the porch and raised a hand. Polo returned the gesture. That was it. No words. He walked the block once, then disappeared back into the city. Some say he moved upstate. Some say he bought a small bike shop under a fake name. Some say he went back to Sicily and started over where it all began. But those who mattered knew better. He hadn't disappeared. He'd done something far rarer. He'd finished something. The war, the one no one admitted ever happened, was over. Not in fire. Not in glory. But in truth. The kind that doesn't ask to be heard, just kept. And so, the mansion once Hell's Gate stayed. A scar. A monument. A place where names weren't erased or exploited, just written down and left in peace. And the man in gray? He became a myth not because of the blood he spilled, but because of the blood he didn't. Not a boss. Not a killer. Just a man who chose silence when the world expected thunder. That silence echoed louder than war.